Howdy my friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289 here on YouTube, and today we have something a little bit different. And this is an experience of mine that, you know, if you've ever bought something, had some high hopes, you just bought it for fun, and I don't know, it just kind of turns out to be kind of a disappointment. Well, today we're going to see if we can undo that disappointment and see if we can make this thing, I don't know, as decent as it can be. It's a pretty unique deal, so with that, let's take a look at it. So here it is peeking around the corner. At first glance, you know, it looks like just your typical dump truck, grain truck, F750, 1972 unit. You know, you look a little bit closer and you're like, that front axle is a little bit different. Kind of a semi-axle under there, kind of an interesting bumper. But as you go around the corner, it gets more and more weird. So here we go. I used to see these all the time, and I've actually always wanted to make one, but there was one for sale once upon a time, so I just went ahead and picked it up. Now it's a little bit different than your average rig, you know, more different than it already is, where it has semi-axles under it, and you know, someone put a lot of time into it at one point, but you know, it's got some issues that we're going to try and go through today and see if we can put it down the road halfway decent. Little shot from the back here. Obviously this thing is egregiously massive. You know, I'm 6'7", and this thing kind of makes me feel small, so I get kind of a chuckle out of that. But basically from the bed forward is a 1972 Ford dump truck with a different axle, and then from the bed back, you know, it has a semi-axle in the rear. The guy did a really good job actually shortening the frame. You know, obviously this is much shorter than it would normally be. And then again, semi-axle in the rear end. And it actually has front and rear disc brakes that, you know, worked pretty well. But given the issues, you know, that actually ended up not being all that important. So opening the hood here, it has the original 1972 Ford 391 FT as opposed to the 390 FE. The FT had a few differences for medium duty and heavy truck use that made it more accommodating to that. Now this one's been a little changed around. It no longer has the governed carb. Someone's changed the distributor. But other than that, I believe it's fairly original, but you know, it's got some issues. Now at first glance, one would think that this truck would be an absolute freight train. You know, it definitely looks the part to some degree, but you know, I'll be the first one to tell you that it struggles to even go 50 miles an hour. And with the re-gearing with the semi-axle, you know, it's not like it's winding out. It's more like it just doesn't have the power to move itself. And this thing goes across the scale. It's 6,500 pounds with a couple people in it. So, you know, it's not all that heavy of a vehicle for what it is. It's got some pretty serious tuning issues. So we'll see if we can rectify that and actually go down the road without it falling completely on its face. So right off the bat, I noticed something up here, but I need to roll the engine over and see if I can get a paint pen on a timing mark on the harmonic balancer here. But obviously here's our timing pointer, so we should be able to stand up here and see what we're doing if I can basically get a good transfer mark so we can see it with a timing light. One thing I did notice up here, this wire attaches into the old harness, and so that is going to be an issue for our HEI. Now this truck originally had points ignition, or it could have, 72 could have been Duraspark, but it was probably points. Either way, Ford uses a resistive lead, and so a HEI module needs 12 volts to function correctly, or else, you know, spark will be weak, kind of the dwell will be all over the place. They don't work super well, and this is the reason that a lot of Ford guys talk a lot of smack about HEIs and always have them fail in their Fords, is because they're just not supplying them the proper voltage. You know, HEIs, GM part, you know, whatever you want to say, I don't mind them, and they work really well if you set them up correctly. And you know, this one here looks like it has a resistive lead, so we'll get our multimeter and check it, but I'm pretty sure not used to having to stand on something to get under the hood. That's a new one for me. All right, so here we go. If we can get up in here. Oh. All right, someone got a little buck wild with the yellow paint. So key on, let me just bump this thing over, if it will bump over. The battery is any good. So here we go. Maybe we can just get the harmonic balancer in a convenient spot. All right, so bumping the timing over, we got pretty lucky here. Let's see if I can show you. Someone has marked the timing before. See if we can get this to focus here. Come on, there we go. And so I'm just gonna try and lighten this up a little bit, maybe. Trying to do this through the lens of the camera. So I was hoping I wouldn't see that, but I think someone did potentially do their due diligence to try and time this thing, potentially at least. So the plot may thicken here shortly. So preliminary check here, we're about to hit the key. We have our multimeter hooked in. It's tied right into the connector adapter for the HEI. I went ahead and checked the firing order because the plug wires and where cylinder 1 is on the distributor, you know, it doesn't matter where it is. Someone can lay it out however they want when they put the distributor in, as long as geometrically everything is correct. But normally you have cylinder 1 at the back, and then just with the firing order, the plug wires lay nice, and these are a little cattywampus, but it looks like tracing everything out, the firing order is correct. I think we can hit the key and see what we have and don't have. Here we go. Resilient weeds growing right up out of the concrete. I tell you what. See if we can get up in here without busting our noggin clean off. All right, neutral, I think. So now, pretty typical goings on here. Is this the choke? Maybe. So as you can see, she kind of sounds like hot garbage, you know, but it does kind of run. So, you know, that's winning so far. All right, place your bets. Bet you we're seeing low voltage. Oh, and look at that, 6 volts. So that's definitely the resistive lead. That would eventually burn out the HEI, and I know it's not working correctly even as it sits right now. So that's definitely going to cause some ignition issues and weak combustion, weak spark, especially when you get into the RPM. One thing I want to show you about this really quick, you do need the engine running, you need a load, or else the resistive lead will mislead you. So you see how it's 6 volts here. We'll do this all in one shot here. Hop in here. Engine off, key on. Oh man, bonked my noggin pretty good. I don't say that too often. And see, there you go. It's 12 volts without a load from the ignition. So, you know, if you're doing Pertronics, other ignition things, you can be easily misled if the engine isn't running and think you have 12 volts, but basically when you get an amp load on everything, then you see the true voltage there with the resistive lead. So anyway, need to definitely fix that. All right, so I've cut the original lead off of here, and something to note is that might have just been grounding on things anyway, as it was with that exposed wire. So, you know, not good. Anyway, so I've tied in our wire, and now I can just basically touch it to the battery, and then I will for sure have 12 volts, no tomfoolery. Obviously not a permanent solution, but we should be able to test things out this way pretty good and see what we have. All right, so we're hooked to the battery there, and it looks like the previous owner did his due diligence to actually set timing with the timing mark on the balancer there. But you know, with the way that ignition was set up with the lead and everything, you know, timing is going to be completely different. That module, if it isn't burned up, should actually work correctly, and now we can get an accurate reading on timing, which is definitely going to be different than what anyone saw before with the way that was previously wired. So who knows where it'll be, but we're heading in the right direction, I think. All right, here we go. Assume it'll be better. Starts better, sounds better. Definitely heading in the right direction. Way better. I don't think we lost the module. I don't think really the fella drove it around all that much, because trust me, when I drove it, you really wouldn't have wanted to. Improvements. I shut the key off here and I had a little mini heart attack. Duh, it's hot wired. I don't know if it picks it up on the video, but it definitely has more of a blop, 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 blop sound than it did before, which is what you want. So we'll just kind of skiddly do, off she goes. Pretty fancy air filter lid for an old dump truck. See if we can get this out of here. There we go. Don't go anywhere. Big old son of a gun. All right, see if we can look down the bore and make sure we get full travel. Looks like it for the most part. The accelerator pump definitely works. The good throttle stick, you know, that's exciting, but that all looks good at least. All right, we got our timing light all hooked up on a Ford. Cylinder 1 is the leading cylinder on the passenger side bank, and on a Ford they're number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so anyway, we're hooked up to 1, we're ready to go. And now, the moment I've all been waiting for. Now this is what's called a dial back timing light. They're exceptionally handy where you only need the top dead center timing mark, and then you can basically use the function of the timing light itself to find the full timing events. And they're really handy for finding total timing, the whole broad range of ignition on an engine. So I'll leave a link below to these, but you know, I've used this one for like, I don't know, 6-7 years, and you know, it's affordable and it's just dang good and easy to use. You're probably not able to see this like I am, but it's not good. You can see where my dial is, and it's still not lined up. So it looks like after top dead center at idle it is, which means if you phase shift the mechanical ignition curve of the distributor, you know, it's all fairly late timing, which will equate to an engine trying to run a little bit warmer than otherwise normally would. Is that why it does run warm? I don't know. It's definitely not helping matters. All right, so we'll turn our key off here and get to work. Anything you would do with a carb to compensate for a shortcoming in ignition timing is just a band-aid. And then, you know, basically you'll just shift the problem to the engine having some sort of an anomaly somewhere else. So when everything isn't set up correctly, you know, you just end up chasing your tail. Ignition timing is usually a pretty good place to start and at least get it relatively close before you start monkeying with the carb, as long as, you know, the carb isn't overflowing or on fire or anything egregiously terrible, which, you know, this one isn't, aside from the throttle sticking, but, you know, we'll just ignore that. And dude, it's like He-Man put this distributor hold down in. It's like got the force of 1,000 suns on it, and naturally I dropped the wrench way down in there, so right there. Very exciting. All right, so now we're looking pretty good. Granted, Got that distributor pretty cattywampus in there, but we're idling with 15 degrees of initial timing. And this distributor probably, we're going to check it here once we bolt everything down, but it probably has 15 degrees of mechanical timing in it, equating to, you know, we'll probably end up 30, 32 degrees of total timing, which is pretty okay. And so at least for a preliminary run, on a Ford, you want to rotate clockwise to advance the timing. If you have a vacuum advance can, you're going to be taking it towards the passenger side. So that's all we did. Put a little rotation in it. A little bit goes a long way, and now it's idling pretty darn good, honestly. Pretty good improvement. Boop, off she goes. All right. Now I used to be a guy that would get in here and do this with the engine running, tighten the distributor back up. Had stitches a couple times in my life, but definitely the nastiest one was when my wrench slipped off and my fan hit the, or my hand hit the mechanical fan rather, you know. I'm lucky I still have a hand, honestly. So anyway, now I just always shut the engine down. And you definitely should too, because it's not a fun experience and it's fairly expensive. So word of caution. All right, distributor's tightened down. I bet you she starts really nice now. Oh, naturally, what do you know? Cool deal, we'll take it. Has a pretty good idle note at this point. Took a little bit more tomfoolery than I thought it would, but 15 degrees initial, and it does have 15 degrees mechanical in it, so total timing is pretty close to 30 degrees, you know, maybe 31 or so, but within that ballpark. So I think we're pretty good. It revs out pretty clean at this point. Little on the cackly side on the free rev, I imagine. But now we can look to the carburetor, and if you're an astute individual, you've already noticed one anomaly with this carburetor. It's definitely, I'm not sure why someone did it, and it probably doesn't need to be there. All right, so our vacuum gauge is hooked to our ported port, and it should show 0 at idle, showing that we don't have too much curb idle screw to idle. That would show us that our initial ignition timing is too late. But all that looks good. You know, it's at 0 here. You see it off of idle, ported becomes manifold pretty quick into the throttle. So, you know, the only difference is at idle, but that's a really good way to see if you have the geometry of your carburetor set up correctly. So that looks good. But if you lean on over this way, take a look over here, someone has put a big old accelerator pump on this carburetor, which it definitely doesn't need. Just giving us a massive pump shot of fuel. You can see all the black and carbon in here. Just check this out. It's the definition of excessive, especially for a stock FP engine. Now, people always say driving a carburetor is like flushing a toilet. You know, I beg to differ, but in this case, this would be the one time that I would have to agree with you. This truck is like trying to take a drink from a waterfall of fuel, you know. So we'll see if we can't find one up here in the garage, an accelerator pump assembly that we can swap that thing out with and make it, you know, a little less ridiculous. All right, I think I found one. This is the first Holley carb I ever owned. It was on my F100 like 15 years ago when I bought it, but I've used it fairly recently, and I think I'm going to pillage the accelerator pump assembly off of this guy. Also, I'm getting kind of tempted to do something stupid. This is a prototype carb cheater adapter to adapt a 2-barrel intake to a 4-barrel carb, and you'd be surprised how well this stuff works. But we'll see if we can get the 2-barrel to work first. I think it could be halfway decent, but I'm probably going to be tempted to do something really stupid. Oh no, little buddy. Getting the carb off here so we can get to the accelerator pump. If you're into these old cars, you can't be afraid to work on things. you know. Some people are afraid, but it's like, do you want to drive around something that's sub-ideal for a really long time, or do you just want to dive in, learn something, fix it right, and then, you know, you're proud because you did it all yourself? That's kind of what this whole old school car thing is all about, at least to me. And here we go. We're going to very carefully take that off so we don't drop the washers in. And that's one carburetor removed. The complete fuel system of a vehicle, that easy. That's why I love carburation. It is pretty simple, technical, but simple and easy to work on. I'm going to go ahead and remove this entire spacer here, just because I just happen to have a spare carb cheater kit for a 2-barrel setup, and I might put one of these on here ultimately, but we'll do it old school at first. But you know, I figured might as well take the advantage of the insulative properties of this bad boy and give us a few extra vacuum ports. As you can see here, it ripped the gasket taking it off, but I'll show you how to avoid this, so you know, you come back 5 years later and you can take a carb off and not ruin your gasket. This is pretty easily avoidable, actually. Because let's be honest, we all absolutely hate dealing with this. Super annoying. So you can see the difference in accelerator pumps here. This is your standard 30cc accelerator pump, I believe. And this is your big Mac Daddy 50cc accelerator pump. So, you know, I don't know if this carb came with this or someone paid, you know, a small fortune to buy it, to add it on. Maybe as a band-aid for the timing, you know, very much possibly the case. And I got very lucky here. They both came off in one piece. You can get a good idea of what a carb that sits for a really long time with ethanol in it kind of looks like. You know, is running ethanol terrible? No, but if you sit for several years with it, especially where it sits down this accelerator pump area, yeah, that's pretty bad. You really don't want to do that. Running every day, you're fine, but sitting for years, you know, you'll get stuff like that all throughout the carb. All right, and there it is, all changed out. Pretty easy to do. You want to make sure that you have 0 lash on your accelerator pump lever, but you're not engaging it. So we're good there. And we've put our mix screws to 1.5 turns out, which gives us a really good starting point. But I'm sure this is going to be night and day better. But if you ever do something like this, you want to make sure you change everything. The pump cam, the accelerator pump diaphragm, the spring inside, all of it needs to transfer over for the accelerator pump to work correctly. And if I had to guess here, they were chasing timing. You know, 90% of carburetor issues are actually issues with ignition timing. Just because it runs doesn't mean it necessarily runs right, you know. So like I said, your carburetor and ignition timing work harmoniously together. And when one of them's whacked out, you know, they affect each other, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So anyway, again, we're headed in the right direction. I'm fairly confident. Nothing like scraping gaskets off, especially one that's probably been on here since 3 Vietnams ago. Now, a handy tip for making it so your gaskets, you know, you can take your carb off like 5-10 years later and it not stick like we had where we had to scrape it off the engine, the carb and everything, is to just put a very liberal amount of wheel bearing grease. And it'll feel completely wrong to do and gross because, you know, it is, but in doing so, it will seep into the gaskets and they just will never end up sticking to anything. And as long as you keep the orientation right on reassembly, you can reuse them again and again and again, as long as you're using the same carburetor. Obviously, you change carbs, you know, the pattern will be different of the impression, but otherwise, you know, it's a pretty handy trick that pretty much costs you nothing and saves you a lot of headache. Another tip that just might save your hind end here. So a lot of times I'll jam nut the nuts on the stud here and use that to drive the stud into the intake, especially an old intake like this. You know, the threads can be a little gacked, you know, so that helps with that. But if you're not careful when you're working around here, you know, it just really pays to cover up the intake, because when, say you're taking these off, one slips out of your hand and goes in the engine, the laziness, the 2 seconds it took you to do this that you didn't want to take, you know, ultimately could result in hours of trying to fish a nut out. And if you're really lucky, it'll fall down in the cylinder chamber. And then basically your whole endeavor is done at that point. So just pays to be a little extra careful. And in the spirit of being observant, I wanted to point out on the back of this carb here, you can see where the back passenger side stud was hitting the carburetor. You know, that might have been why we ended up with a big accelerator pump, because actually we had a nasty vacuum leak where that wasn't sealing very well. But anyway, I just went ahead and ground that down. And now, if we can do this with our non-dominant hand, get out of the way. Now it sits on nice. All right, preliminary check here. Everything's all hooked up. Throttle's in and everything. Travel's decent. I want to point this out, you know, there is a little bit of play here, and that's not stuff you want. So we're going to want to adjust this accelerator pump lever. We want to take this play out, because that will definitely manifest itself as an off-idle stumble in the form of a lean scenario. So, you know, you just really want to be mindful of this, and you think this isn't a big deal. Anytime you move that curb idle screw, you're changing this relationship, and you need to readdress this. So this is something I need to take a look at. Again, that's what you want there. You see that? Zero lash. This lever is still loose. You know, it's not really being engaged, but there's no up and down play. So that'll be good. Let's hit it. All right. Should take a moment for the carb to fill with fuel here. Probably get out and check for leaks, but I'm not going to. Better get some temp. And we're idling. Ta-da! All right. Let's go look at our vacuum gauge. Alright, so that's a pretty good sign. Now remember, you saw in this vacuum gauge that it's phase shifted about 1.5 to 2 inches of mercury below zero. So, you know, 16, 17 it's at about right now. So it's more like 18 or 19. And it's nice and steady. So, you know, we're looking pretty good. At this point, we need to let the temp get up. We want to make all of our adjustments on a warm carb. You know, the 1.5 is a good preliminary start. And then we need to check our accelerator pump to make sure we want to use pump cam position 1 or 2. Right now it's on 2, which is less fuel. It's not bad. Much more respectable than it was. The fabled FE nickel balance test here. The fan's probably going to blow it down. This is a huge fan. I'd say an engine's idling pretty smooth if you can pull that off. Not too bad. Now, if you don't remember anything I taught you in this entire video, the one thing I want you to remember is that you don't adjust the mix screws to the highest vacuum. That's a part of the process, but it seems the internet has perpetuated that that is the way to do it, and then you stop and you're done. You want to go to the first onset of the highest vacuum that you have, and then you want to go 1/8 to 1/4 turn richer from there. And that's the piece that everyone seems to forget today, not talk about. Back in my day, that was common knowledge. It seems like it's been lost with time. But once you have the hood shut, engine heat, everything going on, going for the highest vacuum without doing that second step, you're gonna be too lean, I promise you. So with that, I think we're good here. One thing you'll notice here about this truck is it's gotten a lot quieter. And that's one sad thing about getting old school vehicles tuned in pretty decent, is actually when everything's really efficient and firing when it should and being fueled correctly, you know, it quiets down. As you can see here, you know, the decibel is much less. But one thing I'm not gonna miss, is that. I think we're all done with that tomfoolery. Sure seems like it. Love this massive steering wheel. I'm sure we're gonna bounce our gizzard right off. So here's two. Oh, here go our kidneys over this bump. All right. Other than it just drives infinitely better. The suspension could use a little something. It's even with leaf springs taken out. It's running like a normal truck now. Sure wish the speedometer worked. Here she is parked next to the 76 F250 with a 390 FE. Meanwhile, the F750 with a 391 FT engine. Similar, yet quite a bit different. Now this truck has a PTO shaft, so I'm half inclined to try and actually run my hay baler with this truck just for the fun of it. But it's quite a bit more drivable. As you saw, you can go through the gears, the brakes actually work. You know, stability is better than you think it would be. Just kind of a different rig to putz around with. Moving forward for the fun of it, I think we'll throw a 4-barrel on here and just see how she'll handle it. Has plenty of low end torque with that 2-barrel, but I bet you if we can get some airflow at the medium to top end, I bet you this thing will move down the road pretty quick. It runs pretty good as it is. I should just leave it alone, but I don't know. It's kind of fun and different to mess with. If you followed me for a long time, Carb Cheater is back in stock. Maybe today when I'm releasing this video, might be the following week, but we're gearing up for that again. And I appreciate all your support. Last year, you know, we sold just a ton of those. So it's been really neat to see folks getting involved with that, actually enjoying tuning their carbs again. I've done this engine tuning, ignition tuning stuff for a long time, and I've tried to teach folks for years and years. And honestly, the Carb Cheater has been the best way where someone can just hook all that up. It's really easy to install, and it's all just right in the palm of your hand, and you can, no more guessing, you can just get it done so easy. So anyway, with that, my friends, thanks for coming along today, and I'll catch you for the next one.